Hello, everyone. We are going to discuss the War of 1812. Again, this is simply a resource for you to be able to review later if you are absent on the day of lecture, if you were making up a test, if you just want to re-listen and learn again some of the things that we covered on Thursday, September 15th about the War of 1812. I'm going to share my screen with you all. So yesterday we were covering Jefferson and his presidency. We talked about the Haitian slave revolt and how that's going to inspire some of the enslaved people in the United States to begin rebelling against slavery. We talked about the Louisiana Purchase and how that was an expansion of presidential and federal government power. And today we're going to talk about a war that is beginning. As we talked about yesterday, there are still some conflicts going on between Britain and France. They're trying to drag the United States into that as best as they can. We're going to learn how they did eventually successfully drag them in. So we are going to play this video to introduce the reasons for the War of 1812. While we play the video, I want you to think about the following questions. If you want to make notes of the answers on the side of your guided notes, that will help you because we are going to enter them into the Padlet after the video. So you need to make sure that you have your answer either in your mind or on your paper. So the questions I want you to think about are, why is the War of 1812 considered one of America's most unpopular wars? Why did America declare war? And what were some of the reasons that the British fought this war? So let's take a look at this video and find out. It's only about 5 minutes long. I hope that you'll be able to hear my sound through your end.
At nighttime, we fly a small modern flag. During the day, we fly the 15-star, 15-stripe flag, the same style as the one that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the national anthem. Key saw that flag at a unique time in American history, a time where American morale was really, really low, a turning point in the War of 1812. And a lot of Americans don't know much about the War of 1812. So let's explore the War of 1812 and why it was important for Francis Scott Key to have seen that flag and how that inspired him to write those words that became our national anthem. We're now here on what's called the gun deck of Fort McHenry. We also call it the water battery. This would have been the main line of defense against the British ships. So what was this War of 1812 and why did the British come to Baltimore? Well, what a lot of people find surprising is that really the War of 1812 was one of America's most unpopular wars. And I think that's because the causes were so complex. And on one side, you can say the United States had a totally good reason to go to war. I mean, the British were seizing American ships, dictating who we should trade with, who we could not trade with, stealing American sailors and forcing them into the British Navy. And it was deeper than just baking up a manpower shortage in the British Navy. There was a whole question of citizenship that went with that. You know, in the United States, we believed that you could come from a foreign country, say Great Britain, and come here and live for 5 years, and then you become a naturalized citizen. However, over in Great Britain, they believed once a subject, always a subject. So a lot of our statesmen at the time, they were saying, well, you know, the British are trying to define what an American citizen is. And if we allow them to do that, then we're no better than like we were, say, when we were a colony. A lot of Americans at that time thought that they had something to live up to. You know, they saw that previous War generation, the founding fathers generation, the spirit of 76 is something to live up to. And so a lot of Americans say, well, this War of 1812 is our second war of independence. Certainly those who were pro-war, or the war hawks as they were called, you know, use that language to invoke that spirit of the revolution. They saw the Native American issues on the frontier as a powerful reason, saying, hey, the British are inciting the Native Americans, or as they called them, the savages on the frontier, frontier to shoot American settlers. So, for issues about national honor, freedom of trade, rights for sailors, or free trade and sailors' rights, as they said, as well as protection of our own frontier, well, we have to go to war with Great Britain. We tried the embargoes, kind of like economic sanctions, and it didn't work. They tried sending statesmen over to negotiate this. That didn't work. So they said the only thing left is to declare war against Great Britain. On June 18th, 1812, the United States declared war against the British. But let me give you the British side really quick. And that is, one, the British were involved in a bigger war against Napoleonic France. And the way the British saw themselves, they were liberators. They were the ones trying to free Europe from the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte. And here they needed every sailor they could get to man that Royal Navy. The British were dominant at sea, the French were dominant on land. For the British to win the Napoleonic Wars, they had to maintain those sea lanes. And there were thousands of British sailors who were jumping ship and trying to melt into that American melting pot. And so in some cases, they really were only getting their own people back. And as far as the Native American issues on the frontier, well, the United States didn't always live up to the agreements that they made with some of the Native American nations out there. And so the Native Americans, a lot of them were already angry at the United States. There were some hot-headed American statesmen who wanted an excuse to take over British Canada. And so for some, all these other reasons were just a red herring, just an excuse to go and try to suck up and invade Canada and maybe acquire some land to the north there. Even Francis Scott Key himself said, "I will not harm the poor unoffending Canadians." And Key really epitomized many Americans. They said, you know what, I don't like what the British are doing, but invading Canada is wrong. And so really to this day, the War of 1812 was the most narrowly declared of any American war in which our Congress sat to vote to declare that war. So here the United States.
All right, so let's jump back in to some of those questions here. See if we can
Today's chief
escape this.
interpretation here at the birthplace of the Scottish.
All right, so if we were in class right now, we would answer these questions on the Pear Deck. But first today, we are going to be doing the warm-up. Then we'll get into these War of 1812 guided notes. Then we have 2 discussion boards on Canvas. I decided to implement discussion boards today because I really like having you all talk and interact with each other. But some of you I know have wonderful ideas in your minds, but you're just a little bit nervous or shy to raise your hand and participate in the discussion. So I have these discussion boards as a way to help everybody be able to participate, even if you're a little bit nervous to speak in front of the class. And finally, we will end today with an exit ticket. Again, if we were in class, you would at this time write your response that you recorded on the side of your paper or that you just had in your mind to answer the question, why is the War of 1812 considered one of America's most unpopular wars? Take a minute to think from the video why you think so. One of the main reasons that comes to mind is that this war disproportionately affected the New England region of the United States. That means the northeastern region, because this region focused very much on shipping and had many ports, many maritime ports, that most of their income came from that trade. And like we talked about yesterday, we have the Embargo Act of 1807 occurring here. That's preventing them from making that income with trade. And we still have that impressment, it's a big vocabulary word, impressment of the American ships now by the British and French. So the British and French are attacking those American ships. So people who are making their incomes by trading and sailing at sea are risking their lives and their careers and their incomes through this war, unlike those in the West and the South. So if it was unpopular, why did America declare war? Take a minute to think about your reply. If we were in class, you would record your answer at the bottom of the Pear Deck here. It's really going to come down to those impressments. This is the third class day of content in a row that we've been focusing on those impressments. We first talked about them under Adams when he decided to engage in that XYZ affair and the Alien and Sedition Acts because people were attacking the American ships. We talked about them again yesterday with Jefferson. Those impressments were still occurring under his administration, and that's why he put in that Embargo Act of 1807. And now it's 1812, and those are still occurring. People are still attacking those American ships, trying to steal the goods from them, hurt the sailors on them, because they're trying to encourage the United States to become involved in this conflict. Remember, Britain and France are engaging in the Napoleonic Wars this time. You might remember from American history that those were very intense wars. So they need an ally. They want the United States to become involved. We also have some reasons citing the Native American people in the West. They think that the Native American people are going to side with Britain and France, and they want to be prepared to fight both on that East Coast where they're attacking the ships and on the Western barriers where the Native American people are allies with Britain or France trying to defend their land. What were some of the reasons that the British fought this war? The British were really pulled in by the French. Again, you would write your answer in the Pear Deck, so just think about your answer for just a moment. You write it down on the side of your guided notes since you're not here in class to fill it out. The British were pulled in by the French. The French were trying to overtake more territory, more colonies, and trying to engage in overtaking more land, more power throughout Europe, throughout the Americas. And so the Great Britain was another powerful region at the time that would be seen as the opposing force to France's goals, to their accomplishments that they were trying to make. So to get into the answers further to the previous questions, why would America join this war now? There is renewed fighting between the British and the French that threaten the United States' ability to trade. So not only the Embargo Act that was placed on purpose, but also just that impressment, once again, of those ships being attacked, be putting at risk. We have a threatening of the ability to trade. Great Britain has set up a blockade of goods from Napoleon's Europe to prevent ships from entering or leaving. So not only are there conflicts on the American coast, but also now on the European coast. A ship could get all the way over there and then see a blockade that would prevent them from delivering goods to areas that Napoleon was ruling in France and other areas. Therefore, when those ships reach that area and are still trying to find a way in to make their profit, now Britain is going to be seizing those ships, stealing the goods, attacking the sailors. So now, remember yesterday we were talking about how the French were impressing American ships? Now the British are impressing American sailors. They're seizing them and forcing them to join the British Navy. The turning point for the Americans joining this fight is the Chesapeake incident in June 1807. A British commander demanded to board the United States ship Chesapeake and seize its goods. The captain refused, would not let him on, and the British opened fire, shot at those sailors, killing 3 and wounding 18. Therefore, that's when the United States placed that embargo on Great Britain in retaliation. That's the embargo of 1807 that we talked about yesterday with Jefferson. So given these reasons that we just talked about, do you think that America had enough reason to declare war on the British by 1812? Mainly, we're talking about the impressment of the ships and the sailors and the negative effects that their limits on trade are having on the economy. This is really opinion-based. You're going to write your reply in the Pear Deck if you're in class. Just think about your answer if you're at home. You can record your answer on the side of your guided notes. Do you think that America has enough reason to declare war on the British by 1812? So that was opinion based, so I'm not particularly going to go over an answer for that one. I want you to think about what you think that the criteria for declaring war should be in your minds and consider that and make a decision and defend that decision based on the evidence that we just collected. Whether or not you think that they should have declared war, they actually did. They did declare war. So if you have a printout of the guide notes for today, this section is titled Monroe Declares War. That's not correct. And this is about Madison. Madison declares war. Monroe is going to be the president tomorrow in tomorrow's lesson. Today, it's President Madison is the president. And by spring of 1812, Madison has declared war on Great Britain. Madison believes that the British are trying to strangle American trade, cripple the American economy. So Congress declares war on Great Britain in June of 1812. So here we have a map of how the House of Representatives voted for war or declined to vote for war on June 14th in 1812. So we have a couple different symbols here. This area with the wavy lines is the New England colonies. So we have mostly a no from the New England colonies. 20 votes no, 12 yes. So about 2/3 no, about a third yes. Here, New York, New Jersey, Delaware region, this is a maritime and commercial mid-Atlantic states. So these states are extremely focused on shipping. We have 5 of the House of Representatives members voting for war and 16 voting no war. So about 3/4 no war, a fourth approving the war. Here we have agricultural mid-Atlantic states. So the agricultural means they're focused on farming, Pennsylvania, Maryland. So we have 22 House of Representatives members from this state approving the war and 5 not approving the war. Mostly approving the war. This is the western frontier, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee. We have yes, 9 voting yes, approving the war, and 0 voting no, denying the war. Then we have the South, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. In this South area, 31 people vote yes, and only 3 people vote no. So the South and the West very much support the war. These agricultural mid-Atlantic states also, I would throw into that region, do support the war. So this northern region, New England, and this maritime and commercial mid-Atlantic slave states, I'm sorry, I shouldn't throw in the word slave in there, just mid-Atlantic states. It's because I associate the word Atlantic with Atlantic slave trade. I just said it automatically, but this didn't have to do anything with slavery. This particular slide, what I'm talking about. So just these agricultural mid-Atlantic states. So basically, Delaware and North did not support the war. They're very focused on trade, access to trade, and therefore are not very focused on joining this war that would very much impact their main trading allies of France and Britain. If you're fighting with someone, you're not going to be wanting to trade with them. So based on what we just talked about, that these states I'm circling did support the war, and these states I'm circling did not support the war. What patterns do you see in how representatives from different regions voted for or against the war? So if you were here in class, again, you would now type on the Pear Deck for what you believe the answer is. But since we're not, what I'll be looking for the most in those answers is I want somebody to say, this is an example, yet again, of sectionalism. Sectionalism is those differences between the North and the South that eventually lead to the Civil War. So again, the North has very different goals than the South, making them have very varying opinions on whether or not they should participate in war. So based on what we just discussed about the different regions in this chart, if we throw, for example, a farmer living in Ohio at you, based on how you see the House of Representatives members living in Ohio voted, how would a farmer in Ohio feel about the war? So you can reference this key, reference this map, reference what we just discussed. Don't say anything out loud. Think about it for 10 seconds. Talk to the people around you. What do you all think? How would a farmer in Ohio feel about the war? Just talk to the people at your table. All right, now we'll talk out loud as a whole class about how you think people in Ohio, a farmer in Ohio, might feel about the war. So at this point, if you were in the room, ask for volunteers to talk out loud. But since you are not, I'll just go ahead and let you know that because we see here that all of the representatives from the Western frontier, which is designated by these horizontal lines, voted yes in support of the war, we will say yes, the Ohio farmer will support the war. And what about someone who lives in one of the maritime mid-Atlantic states or the New England states? What about someone who lives in the New England states? Turn and talk to someone near you. What do you think? How would someone in the New England states feel about the war? So there's going to be a little more difference in opinion here, but overall, we will see that they do not support the war. So if it were to be a multiple choice question, you would say, no, someone living in New England would not support the war. Why? Because they have those trade ports, and the war is going to negatively affect their economy because they would no longer be able to trade with their main trade partners, Britain and France. So given everything that we just discussed, I want you to write one more time. Why did the United States and Britain go to war in 1812? Impressment is what you should write there. There are some main highlights from the War of 1812. We have the Battle of Baltimore, when Francis Key Scott writes the poem, The Star-Spangled Banner. We have the British burn DC, when First Lady Dolly Madison, the wife of James Madison, saves a portrait of George Washington after the British Canadians burn the White House. We have the Hartford Convention, which is the end of the Federalist Party. We have the Battle of New Orleans, where we're introduced to General Andrew Jackson. We are going to be talking about him next week. He is famous for his participation in this Battle of New Orleans, and he was considered a war hero in the War of 1812. So he will continue to come up. He is going to become our president for next Monday's lesson. So remember that this is how people know him. They know him as a war hero from the Battle of New Orleans. And finally, we have the Treaty of Ghent, which ends with the end of the war, armistice declared. So even though we have this big giant war, we didn't really have any changes in boundaries of the United States. So that end, what we were talking about on the West, where the Native American people were trying to secure their land, nothing like that really happened for them significantly to change their boundaries or the United States boundaries. Oops. So Tecumseh was a Native American tribe leader who was very much trying to defend that Western land throughout the war. General William Henry Harrison, he might be a familiar name. He was an Indiana Territory governor during this time, and he convinced the Native American tribal leaders to sign away 3 million acres of tribal land. Chief Tecumseh believed that the only way for Native Americans to protect their homeland against intruding white settlers was to form a confederacy, which is a united Native American nation. Tecumseh began negotiations with the British for assistance in what seemed like an inevitable war with the Americans. So the Native American people are banding together, even though they have very different tribes, very different identities, and they are uniting with the British against the United States. In the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, General Harrison burned the Shawnee capital to the ground and discovered that British Canada was arming the native people, giving them weapons. Warhawks like John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay began to pressure Congress and Madison to declare war. So that we talked about, he convinced the Native American people to sign away 3 million acres of tribal land. How do you think he could have done that? What could he have said to these people to convince them to sign away 3 million acres of land? Put in your thoughts in the Pear Deck here. That is, if you're in class. Because you're not in class and you're watching this video, write it down on the side of your guided notes. Just think about it for 1 minute. So the main answer is to do so. He pitted Native American tribes against each other. He used their differences between one another to exploit their rivalries between different tribes and allow that to purchase land, to sell that land. He convinced them to sell land based on using Native American tribes' differences against one another. Because remember, these tribes are getting pushed further and further west. So now there are new groups of people in this western area that were not there before. They're fighting about the land among themselves. So it makes it very difficult to coordinate these agreements, and that is why Tickamisoo's national bound of the tribes is so important, because Tickamisoo realized that in order to effectively defend their land, they needed to unite as one and not be able to be manipulated and pitted against one another. So as these territories like this one that Henry Clay is over and Harrison is over, where they're getting that Native American land, as these territories continue to develop and grow, the big question is, should slavery be allowed in the new territories? And this continues to contribute to that sectionalism that we've been discussing. The War of 1812 is going to create a united American identity and increase nationalism. Remember, Federalist Party, we've been talking about it winding down since Adams, continued during Jefferson, and today during Madison, Federalist Party completely gone. So there's one political party right now, the Democratic Republican Party. Everybody's kind of vibing with them. Increased nationalism. What is nationalism? Nationalism is like a strong identity with the country, pride for the country, support for the country as a whole. Another effect of the war is that Native American people are losing out once again, losing more and more land to the settlers who continue to move west. And they sided with the British, and the British lost. This is also going to cause the beginning of manufacturing development and the first industrial revolution, because trade was one of the most profitable industries, but during the war, they couldn't effectively trade because their main trade partners, again, were Britain and France, who they're going to war with. So they cannot engage in this trade as their main source of income anymore in the New England area. And so that New England area is going to turn to manufacturing. Remember how we talked about mercantilism? They were sending out those raw materials. Now their trade partners are not sending back the manufactured goods. So they're going to have to start manufacturing for themselves. That's how we get into this new era of industrial revolution. So I just talked about it on the last slide. There's multiple things you could put. How does the War of 1812 affect the economy? Put in your answer here. How does the War of 1812 affect the economy? I should talk about the answer, I guess, since you're not here to actually put in. We just talked about it on the last slide. The economy is going to change from trade focused to industry focused to manufacturing focused, and that is going to impact the rest of American history. So our next steps, we are going to complete discussion number 1 on Canvas first. So let me pull that up for you to show you what we're going to. So we're going to go to modules. We're done with unit 0. Close that. We're done with unit 1. Close that. So we're going to go down to unit 2. Sorry, it's just being a little glitchy here. Go to discussion number 1. I'm going to write at least 3 sentences to answer this question. What were the significant consequences of the War of 1812? You must cite evidence from your notes, the slides, or this Khan Academy link to answer this question. And you must reply to one other student with a question or by adding another piece of evidence to support their answer. Someone poses a question to you before the end of your class period, you are required to post a reply. I am actually going to change this to say write at least 1 paragraph, because there are a lot of effects of the war, and I want you to be able to explain them effectively. I'm obviously recording this before your class period. Okay, if we were in class, I would give 20 minutes to go ahead and start on this before going to the next one. But since we're not, you're gonna pause this video, go ahead and answer that question if you haven't already in class, and we'll go on to the next one. Again, this is supposed to be an in-class assignment, so the only reason you should be doing this now at home is if you were absent or you didn't do it during class. So you're going to analyze these quotations from Chickamauga, the Swanee chief who resisted the United States taking over the Western Native American territory. We just learned about him on the slides. These are some quotes from him. He says, "Sell a country, why not sell the air, clouds, and the great sea, as well as the earth? Did not the Great Spirit make them all for the use of his children?" Next we have, "Before the palefaces came among us, we enjoyed the happiness of unbound freedom and were acquainted with neither riches, wants, nor oppression." And we have, "Let us form one body, one heart, and defend to the last warrior our country, our homes, our liberty, and the graves of our fathers." Now, if you have any words that you didn't understand in these quotes, now is the time to ask about them. For example, I'll throw out one for you that might be difficult. We have oppression. That means that they are being hurt by other people. They're being discriminated against. They're being seen as lesser. So you have a choice for this assignment. You can either write at least 5 sentences or record a 1-minute video of yourself in response to the following questions. How do these quotes make you feel? Place yourself in the shoes of a Native American living in the Northwest Territory during the War of 1812. What would Native American people see, hear, and think during this time? What were some of the effects of the War of 1812 on Native American people? How did the War of 1812 further marginalize this group of people? You must use evidence from your notes, the slides, or the above quotes in your answer. You must reply to one other student asking a question or adding evidence to their response. If a classmate posts a question to you before the end of your class period, you are required to answer it. And then you'll have about 20 minutes to work on this as well. If you have extra time, you're going to go into the modules. Again, we're done with unit 0. Scroll past that. We're done with unit 1. We can collapse that. We are going to go into the crash courses, because remember, this is your overarching assignment for unit 2. So whenever you have extra time within class, you are going to work on your crash courses. So I'm about to find out for you right now which one is about the War of 1812. I'm going to encourage you to try your best to get to that one today. Let's see what we got. I'm going to go on to YouTube to find it for us. It thinks that I'm searching on my own profile. That's fun. I'll just pause for 1 second so you don't have to sit here. Okay, it is crash course number 11. So after you're done with your 2 discussions, you are going to finish crash course number 10 if you haven't already, and then move on to crash course number 11 and try to finish that today. Then we are going to do a short exit ticket, which will be available also in Canvas. So make sure to take a look at that, which hasn't been posted quite yet as of this recording, but will be posted by the time of your class period. Thank you all so much for spending your time with me today. Thanks for reviewing the information or participating in this video if you're absent on the class day. If you have any questions, you can write to me anytime. You can ask me in class, and I look forward to having a conversation about the content. Thank you.